Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Coffee Break. It's Steve Barrett here, Editorial Director of PR Week. And we've got Dustee Jenkins with us, Head of Global Communications at Spotify, joining us for a cup of coffee. How are you doing, Dustee?
I'm doing well, Steve. I've got my coffee here. Thanks so much for having me.
And look, I'm a bit disappointed because I'm in the spots and you're in the stripes. So, I tried to be on brand here, but but anyway.
I do appreciate the spots. Thank you so much. We're all about the pattern.
So listen, exciting times at Spotify, and you had a great event last week, Spotify Stream On, which is not an upfront, but it's where you sort of talk to the creative community about your offerings, what's coming up, how you're doing, numbers, new products, etc. What were the sort of top line things that you revealed, unveiled, or gave an update on?
This was really a first of its kind event for Spotify, Steve. And obviously we're doing it in the middle of a global pandemic. And so normally events like this would happen live with an audience, not today. And so
we all miss those days, don't we?
We do miss those days. I can't wait to go to a concert. But in our case, we really went around the world, obviously taking COVID protocols in mind, being as safe as possible. And we filmed our leaders talking about sort of the state of the business, what's happening in audio streaming, where audio streaming is headed. We talked about some new products. We unveiled some new content. So a really exciting 90 minutes for us.
Yeah, so I mean, the upfront, I know this isn't an upfront, but the way people go to market, whether they're TV companies or Google or Facebook, it's changing, isn't it? Especially in lockdown. I think lockdown's probably accelerated those disruptions and they probably won't come back. And it was almost like the upfront concept was tailored to the channels rather than the advertisers or the users. So how did you tweak that? And I guess you've got a bunch of earned media anyway for this, but you also got, it's also an owned media event, isn't it, for you?
You're exactly right, Steve. And I think that's what's really changing and I'm so excited about in our industry is that storytelling is taking on so many different forms. I mean, we're sitting here talking about what's happening in our industry via podcast. And so you're seeing more and more of that, people really telling their own story in their own way. And that's what we were doing here. We wanted to sort of give a little bit of the history, where the company's been and where the company's headed. And then we were announcing lots of things. And the ability to really do this in one format with lots of our leaders in a way that we're able to sort of say, we want to manage something this way. We want to allow ourselves to talk about these really important topics. I think you're going to see brands more and more seek to tell their own stories in new and different forms. Obviously, we're all familiar with the power of the corporate blog. Our blog at Spotify is called For the Record. It's something we're really proud of. And I think that's going to continue to evolve and people will just continue to storytell in different forms.
Yeah, and then you've still obviously got the street and you've got the formal quarterly and financial presentations, and yours was a month ago by the time this podcast goes out, this video. And how do you communicate to the street? Because that's a different audience. They have their own ways of analyzing your business. I think to be fair, they were slightly disappointed and the share price went down. But on the other hand, you had some good news about podcasting, and because you really pushed into that, and you had a great quarter, I think, in Q4, where monthly active users went up from 22% to 25%, and possibly that was on the back of the Joe Rogan podcast, but you tell us. But how do you balance and message to the street in comparison to the way you did the Stream On event?
Obviously, we think a lot about those key milestones like quarterly earnings. As a publicly traded company, that is a place and time to almost give a report card on the state of the business. And so Daniel Ek does what many CEOs do, and that's hold an investor call. He starts with opening remarks. That allows us to, again, storytell, really talk about the quarter. Spotify had a very, very strong Q4. So we reported those numbers just a few weeks ago. But this was really an opportunity to get into more of the long range plan. And we don't do something thinking about how it will in one single moment may or may not impact the share price. This was really about taking a step back, looking at the business on the whole, and talking about where we're headed, and an opportunity to announce a new podcast with President Obama and Bruce Springsteen, We highlighted many of the deals that we have made in the past. We also launched in a number of markets globally, a real first of its kind moment for Spotify, where we typically go market by market. It will take us from being in 93 markets around the world to now 178 markets. And so that was a really bold, big move for us. We highlighted artists, we highlighted tools that we have for creators, but really that creator audience is who we were talking to at this event. It was an opportunity to say, here's how we're thinking about content on Spotify. Here's how you can help monetize your content. Here's how you can grow your audience. And so we really wanted to reach that creator audience. And how do we do that? Well, we all know in this industry, the way you do that is by talking to them, by talking with them, by using people they will respect. And so in our case, we used creators to storytell. And so rather than us telling you about the cool feature we have called Canvas, which allows music artists to actually put art to their music as you're hearing it on Spotify, we let Halsey, who's an incredible global artist, tell you about Canvas and how she's leveraging Canvas. And so I was really excited to see what we could do with this event. And the numbers were just massive. We had more than 270,000 views of the event in the first 48 hours. We have more than 19 billion global media impressions. And so the response was really quite incredible. And then in addition to that, to your point about the street, we held a Q&A with the investor community just as the market closed that day. And so I think the thing about moments like this is there are so many different audiences. And how do you think about each audience and reaching each audience and engaging with them? We also really reached out to the advertising community with this because there was a real big piece on how advertisers could leverage Spotify. And so we tried to think about all those various audiences and just meeting them where they are.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that a bit more, but tell us a bit about the drive into podcasting. Made some big high profile acquisitions, Gimlet, Parcast and Ringer. Michelle Obama's podcast, you mentioned President Obama and Bruce Springsteen, Joe Rogan, really big plays, and that seemed to be working. Tell us about the podcast strategy and maybe give us some interesting info about, the Joe Rogan stuff and the Obamas.
Yeah, so we're really excited about podcasts at Spotify. A couple of years ago, we made those acquisitions with Gimlet and Parcast and Anchor. And really at that time, Spotify was obviously known for being the world's largest music streaming service. And Daniel quite intentionally wanted to pivot the company to be about the world's largest audio streaming service. And obviously podcasts are exploding. We are seeing the growth on our platform on the podcasting side. It's just massive. And so we put forth some numbers at the Stream On event. I would encourage people to go and check those out. But we also shared some of the partnerships that we're bringing to the table. And so Joe Rogan is the most popular podcast globally on our platform, the most listened to podcast. It's now exclusively on Spotify. And so the hope is that he brings that very engaged audience with him. In addition, we also have the Obamas, who are powerful voices all around the world, and they're doing lots of different things. We just announced this new podcast with President Obama and Bruce Springsteen. We have the Duke and Duchess of Sussex on the platform, and so they came out with a holiday special, and they are also doing a podcast with us, and we will hopefully work with them on several projects. We announced a project with Ava DuVernay. We've got lots of things in the works, not to mention our own teams are working on fiction podcasts, true crime, getting into podcasts on science with Science Versus. And so the content can really run the gamut, just like what we're doing here. But podcasts with over 2 million podcasts on the platform now, it really is exploding globally.
That's a lot of podcasts. Now, with your sort of experienced communications hat on, obviously Joe Rogan, he can divide opinions and he's, can be controversial. That's part of his allure. You've got Bruce, who, had that high-profile DUI incident. How do you deal with those sort of challenges from a crisis comms point of view?
So obviously, we've got a lot of different voices, and not just American voices. We've got voices around the world. And so we have a pretty clear content policy in place where it comes down to what you say on our platform. And obviously, if there's any content that violates that policy, we do go forward and remove that content. And every now and then we have to do that. And, that also pertains to music as well. So there are pretty clear policies in place. Otherwise, we're really excited to have this blend of lots of different points of view, lots of different voices, and you get into a variety of so many different topics, everything from news and what's happening in the world today to, massive discussions about things like climate change and social unrest. And so the thing about a podcast is it's such an intimate format. And so people, because they don't have a camera in their face, because they're not so guarded about how they look, are more willing to open up in a podcast format. And so I think just in forms of communication, I think it's such a powerful medium, and I cannot wait to see what people continue to do with it.
No, I agree. And audio generally is really popping at the moment. We've seen the rise of audio social networks like Clubhouse. We've seen Twitter Spaces. Facebook's looking at that space. There are 2 or 3 other startups in that space. How do you see Spotify playing in that area? Would you consider launching a social network like Clubhouse? Is that something that you're looking at, or is part of the strategy?
I would say that the way we think about it is that the opportunity in audio is just massive. And we still think it's largely untapped. And so you see more and more people adopting podcasts, taking up podcasts. But it's funny, I still talk to some friends and they're like, I haven't tried out podcasts yet. And so there are a lot of people that we can still reach. And the streaming numbers are just growing as well. And so I still think, look at the event we had this week. We're expanding into new markets around the world. Those are markets that didn't yet have a Spotify. And so the opportunity is massive. And of course, we're paying attention to all different forms of audio. We're testing things all the time. We are paying attention to the idea of live audio. And that is something that we talked about on Monday following this event, because obviously it naturally brings up questions. For us, though, it really is about the long term. The difference between Spotify and many other companies is, for a lot of companies, audio is an add-on. Their main focus is on selling product, or their main focus is on running a marketplace, and then they add audio onto that. At Spotify, we think about audio 24/7. We're innovating on top of innovation. And so we're constantly looking at how do we make an audio experience better and better and better. And so it is our day job and our night job. And it's one that I would say, because of that, we tend to be a bit further ahead. We're trying things. We've been at this for almost 15 years.
Yeah, if I'm thinking of something like Clubhouse, it's ephemeral, isn't it? It's live and then it's gone. It's not recorded. But it's still a young platform. It's less than a year old. The founders have said that they're looking to see how they would integrate with pro podcast services. So I guess down the line there could be partnerships. They do actually. People put their Twitter and their Instagram handles in as part of the sign-up process. So it's not one of these social networks where they won't, like it's a closed walled garden. So I guess down the line, there could be partnerships. It could be, I just think the audio world is going to explode, and there are going to be all sorts of different things going on. And we are just scratching the surface, like you said. How much of this growth is down to the pandemic and everyone being at home and looking for things to do and looking for podcasts versus, okay, they're not commuting anymore because people used to, listen to podcasts a lot. How have you seen the user habits change?
They changed pretty dramatically, Steve. And so obviously at the beginning of the pandemic, we watched people sort of scramble and not know what to do. And then behavior started to normalize and really shift. And so, for example, people are listening to us far more on things like the gaming device. And that's something that we didn't see as much of prior to the pandemic, because they're home and they're playing video games. And that's a great way to engage with a service like Spotify. Another example is that home device listening has really exploded during the pandemic versus listening in your car. And then even what people are listening to has changed pretty dramatically. And so we used to have lots of playlists about hosting parties and dinner parties, and all of a sudden those shifted to playlists about cooking, or playlists about, playing a game night with your family, or people started making playlists about baking bread and cutting hair. And so we got lots of fun ones in there. People got very creative. But what we're paying attention to is what happens as we normalize. And it is a big unknown for every single company. There isn't a company around that wasn't impacted in some way by this pandemic. Life changed for all of us. And as a result, every single company felt that. And so for us, we are going to pay attention to what happens to home listening as people go back to the office, get back in their cars. But the reality is, once habits are set, once you start listening to music with your family when you're cooking at night, once you're listening to music in the morning, once you've set these routines, they typically have some stickiness to them. And so we do think that home is going to be a place where we continue to see listening, as will gaming devices. But like every company, we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating discussion, and we're out of time, unfortunately. I really enjoyed that. So much to talk about in the audio space. So thanks, Dustee, for joining us. Really good chat, and look forward to seeing what things Spotify rolls out over the rest of the year. Thanks
Awesome,
for joining.
thank you.